Here he is for our weekly visit. It's Pierre LeBrun, our hockey insider, and we begin. Oh, Pierre, are you ready for this? Are you ready to begin with the Toronto Maple Leafs? I mean, they gave up 7 goals in a loss Tuesday. They're 1-5-2 in their last 8. 4 games before next Wednesday's Olympic trade freeze. 8 points out of a wild card spot. The calls to sell from Leaf Nation are obviously getting pretty loud. What's your sense about how Brad Treliving will approach the deadline?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think the one thing that will help Toronto, and it's going to help a lot of organizations, is that there's an Olympic break coming, Jay, and I know a lot of front offices want to use that time to sort of look at where they are and where they should head ahead of the March trade deadline. I think it's pretty obvious at this point for the Maple Leafs. And, you know, I think the opportunity here for the Leafs is to do a bit of what Boston did a year ago, which is realize where you are and try to take advantage of that in terms of asset management. You know, the Bruins never intended to miss the playoffs last year, Jay, but they pivoted just ahead of the deadline, and they traded the likes of Brandon Carlo and Charlie Coyle and, of course, Brad Marchand, the last trade of the entire deadline right before 3 p.m. Eastern. They did well in those moves, and it set them back up to try and bounce back this year, which they have. Now, it's easier said than done, of course, but I think that has to be the realization for Brad Treliving and the Toronto Maple Leafs, that instead of maybe extending a Scott Laughton or any other pending UFA, maybe you should be listening on what you can get for them. And listen, the Leafs have a lot of cap room coming up this summer. There's a chance for them to pivot that way. But here's the other thing I would say. The tricky part here is, you know, Brad Treliving has 1 more year left on his contract after this season, and you can't ignore that part of all this. You know, Brendan Shanahan hired Brad Treliving. Brendan Shanahan was let go after last year. Brad Treliving now reports to Keith Pelly. What will be the fallout if the Leafs can't get back in a playoff spot and they miss the playoffs here this year? And that's an open-ended question because I don't know that everyone knows for sure. But what I'm saying is, I don't know how motivated, you know, a GM might be to start ripping apart some of his team if he's not exactly sure what that means for his own future. So we'll see.
Man, very complicated situation. Hey, the Montreal Canadiens, they're currently in a playoff spot. However, they also rank near the bottom of the league in goals against and save percentage, and they fired their goalie coach, Eric Raymond, on Wednesday. Is this change as simple as those stats being bad, or is there something more here, Pierre?
Yeah, listen, I think there were philosophical differences in terms of the approach, in terms of how Montreal's goalies, approach games and so on. Let's put it this way. You know, my colleague Artemi Panarin made a great point when he wrote this in The Athletic. There are 2 things that have happened this year that tell you that the Habs weren't happy with their goaltending situation. One is they called up prized prospect Jacob Fowler in early December. That was never the plan. They wanted him to marinate most of the year. Now, they sent him back, but my point is, A, they had to call him up because Samuel Montembeault was struggling that much. And B, they fired their goalie coach. Those are 2 things that if you would have said before the season the Montreal Canadiens were going to do, then there would have been a red flag. And there is. And, you know, I think in particular, I think when Samuel Montembeault, who's had some good moments since he's come back, but he let in a couple weak ones in Boston on Saturday night. And when he spoke to the media a couple of days later, he said, you know, he thought he had a pretty solid night. You know, I don't think that's what you want to hear if you're the Montreal Canadiens, you know, from a goalie who's struggling. So I think this is a reset for everyone involved. Jeff Gordon went to the point of explaining the change to the president of hockey operations for the Habs, which you don't see every day. And I think it speaks to the fact that I think there was a little tension there, and that this is something that the Canadiens at the management level have been thinking about for a while here. It was not a spur of the moment decision.
Artemi Panarin, the bread man, Pierre. We know him, we love him, we know he's not going to be re-signed by the Rangers. The Rangers held him out of the lineup Wednesday against the Islanders. It's not expected he will play again before the Olympic break. He is currently number 1 on our trade bait list. So, Pierre, any insight into which teams might take a flyer on a guy that they may or may not be able to sign to a long-term deal?
Yeah, well, let's start with, how we got here. I mean, when the Rangers announced publicly that they were retooling in that letter on Friday, January 16th, they also that day told Panarin, we're not signing you. And, will help facilitate a trade. That was hard news for Panarin to digest. Might have been obvious to the rest of us that with a pending UFA, who's 34 years old, and you're going into a retool, that you're not going to re-sign him. But I know for him, it was because he loves New York. It was really hard to take. So since then, his agent, Paul Theophanis, has had the green light from the Rangers, or eventually got the green light from the Rangers, to contact teams directly. And this is important because A, he's got a full no move. B, they're trying to get an extension out of this. The plan here for Panarin and his agent is that they forego July 1st, and their July 1st is happening right now. And what we're hearing is maybe asking for an extension, multi-year deal, maybe as many as 4 years for a 34-year-old player. And that AAV is not going to be cheap. So that's not for everyone. And I'll give you an example. I believe that their camp reached out to the Anaheim Ducks because there's history there between Joel Quenneville, head coach in Anaheim, and Panarin. But when the extension came into play, I think the Ducks soured on that, and the Ducks at this moment, I believe, have passed on the Panarin situation. A couple other teams to look at. One is the Carolina Hurricanes. Every time someone big is available, the Hurricanes just want to get in there.
It's so true. It's so true.
But listen, the fit is. The fit makes sense. They to get over the hump, do they need more offense? So our understanding is that the Hurricanes have investigated this situation. LA Kings absolutely struggled scoring. They got a ton of cap room starting next year with the retirement of Anze Kopitar. They got like $25 million in cap room starting next offseason. So they want to make not just one move, but a few moves. Ken Holland does. So I think the Kings have batted this around as well to some degree, and we'll see what other teams get in there. But the key points to remember here is that an extension should be part of this transaction if all goes according to plan for the agent here.
Okay, so let's go from the bread man, Pierre, to the bread boy, Andrew Mangiapane. He's been in and out of the Oilers lineup for the past month. You wrote in The Athletic on Tuesday about the team potentially getting closer to dealing Mangiapane. It seems like that's what both sides would love to happen here. So what is the latest here?
Yeah, I see what you did there, by the way. That's why you're the best. By the way, I don't think I wrote that it was getting closer, Jay, just to be precise. What I tried to explain is that it wasn't for a lack of trying by the Edmonton Oilers.
Right.
It's not like when this first became news more than a month ago during the holidays, there was a fervor of phone calls and obviously nothing has happened. It's not like the Oilers just gave up and they're not talking to teams. My understanding is from looking into it this week is that Oilers GM Stan Bowman very much has stayed on it. He has had multiple conversations with more than a few teams. It's not just one team. So the problem is it's been such a tough season for him that I think some teams that have looked at it have said, well, are you giving us a pick to take him? Is this like the Palat situation between the Devils and Islanders? Or what are you asking for in return? So I think agreeing on what the value is for Mangiapane, who has another year on his deal at $3.6 million a year, Jay. That's been the problem here. But, I wonder about a team like Winnipeg. I wonder about Ottawa. I wonder about St. Louis. There are different situations where because he's not a pending UFA, where perhaps some non-playoff teams might see some value if it's on the bargain. But anyway, the Oilers will keep at it.
And then we talked last week about all the injuries that the Swedish Olympic team is dealing with heading into Milan, Pierre, but they might have actually gotten some good news, I understand?
Well, listen, Gabriel Landeskog is doing all he can to make sure he's in Milan. And, I saw him at practice this week in Toronto. The Avs stayed in Toronto after their Sunday game before they went to Ottawa for the game Wednesday night. And Landeskog took in his first practice with the Avalanche since his injury in early January. Non-contact, but still it was a huge step in his comeback attempt here to go to Milan. And in talking to Jared Bednar, the Avs head coach, a couple of times over the past week on this situation, it's pretty clear that this is about wanting Landeskog to be there as an organization. They're cheering for this guy to be there. And that at this point, I'd be shocked if he's not there. I don't know that he'll be 100%. But I think all signs are lining up that Landeskog is going to the Olympics.
Wow, that's exciting. And that means you're going to get to cover him. You're about to head to Milan to cover. How excited are you, Pierre? You're going over there right away to cover this incredible tournament.
Yeah, I leave next week, and Jay, listen, I've had the privilege of covering the the NHL players in Salt Lake in '02. That's the Marty Brodeur picture behind me. '06 Torino when Sweden beat Finland in that great rivalry game for the goal. That's one of my favorite games ever. Golden goal in 2010, and of course the 6-0 Canadian team in Sochi, Russia. They are the greatest memories in my 31-year career is Olympic hockey. So I can't wait to do it again.
Well, we wish we could talk to you a little bit more over the next few weeks, but we know you're going to be busy. So travel safe and eat a lot of pasta and drink a lot of red wine, and make sure you charge it to the company.
I don't struggle on those facets of my game, but I'll do my best again.
Thanks, buddy.